The Grand Assembly Hall of the Galactic Council stretched across 20 kilometers of gleaming crystal and metal, its vaulted ceiling disappearing into artificial clouds that drifted between holographic stars. Representatives from 347 species filled the tiered seating, their various forms of communication creating a symphony of clicks, whistles, harmonics, and telepathic resonance that the universal translator struggled to keep pace with. At the center of it all, on the speaker's dais, stood Ambassador Elena Vasquez of humanity. Her simple black diplomatic uniform looked almost primitive compared to the flowing biomechanical robes of the Zephyrians or the crystalline exoskeletons of the Chromoc delegates. But her presence commanded attention in a way that transcended physical appearance. The motion before us today, announced Grand Speaker Theclon, his four arms gesturing in the ritualistic patterns of his species, concerns the expulsion of humanity from the Galactic Council. The charges are severe: violation of the Sentient Protection Protocols, unauthorized military expansion, and, most concerning of all, the development and deployment of weapons classified as existential threats to galactic stability. A ripple of unease passed through the assembly. The Delphinian contingent's bioluminescent patches flickered nervously, while the hive mind representatives of Sector 7 pulsed with agitated collective thought. Elena remained motionless, her hands clasped behind her back, her expression unreadable. She had expected this moment for months, ever since the Kepler incident had sent shockwaves through the galactic community. What she hadn't expected was how it would feel to stand here, representing not just her species, but potentially their last chance at remaining part of the greater galactic civilization. The evidence is clear, continued Counselor Veltar of the Hegemony, his serpentine form coiled around his speaking platform. The humans' actions at Kepler 442b resulted in the complete sterilization of a planet-sized weapons platform. No species in recorded galactic history has demonstrated such thorough destructive capability. It was necessary, Elena said quietly, her voice carrying easily through the hall's acoustics. The Devourers were 3 hours from breaking through our defensive lines. If they had reached the civilian evacuation zones, the point, interrupted Counselor Vectura, her insectoid mandibles clicking with irritation, is not whether your actions were justified, but whether your species possesses capabilities that make you a threat to galactic peace. The weapon you deployed didn't just destroy the Devourer platform. It unraveled matter at the quantum level across an area of space larger than most star systems. Murmurs of fear and disgust echoed through the assembly. Elena had heard it all before in the preliminary hearings, the closed-door sessions, the endless diplomatic negotiations that had led to this moment. The galaxy was afraid of what humanity had become, and, perhaps more importantly, what they might become. We developed those weapons, Elena replied, because we were the only species willing to face the Devourer threat head-on, while the rest of the galaxy debated appropriate response protocols. We lost 17 worlds and 2 billion people buying time for your evacuation efforts. The Grand Speaker raised one of his primary arms for silence. The Council acknowledges humanity's sacrifice in the Devourer War. Your species' courage and tactical innovation were unprecedented. However, the question before us today is not about past service, but about future coexistence. Dr. Sarah Chun, Elena's chief science advisor, shifted uncomfortably in the human delegation section. She had been one of the lead researchers on Project Pandora, the classified program that had produced humanity's quantum disruption weapons. The irony wasn't lost on her that the weapons designed to save galactic civilization were now being used as evidence to exile them from it. The Philosophical Council of Zirion has prepared a detailed analysis, announced Counselor Morgeth, a being whose crystalline form refracted light in complex patterns that served as their species' primary form of expression. Their findings suggest that humanity's approach to problem-solving, what they term destructive innovation, poses an existential risk to the stability of galactic civilization. Elena felt a familiar anger building in her chest, the same emotion that had driven her through years of diplomatic training, through the horrific battles of the Devourer War, through the countless sessions where other species questioned humanity's right to exist among them. But she kept her voice level professional. The Xerian Philosophical Council, she said, has never faced an existential threat. They've never had to choose between the survival of their species and adherence to philosophical ideals. We made the hard choices that preserved this council's ability to debate ethics from the safety of their homeworlds. The silence that followed was deafening. Even the constant background hum of the translation systems seemed to pause, as if the machines themselves were processing the weight of her words. Counselor Thicklon's 4 eyes focused on Elena with an intensity that made several nearby delegates visibly uncomfortable. Are you suggesting, Ambassador Vasquez, that humanity believes itself above the moral and ethical frameworks that govern civilized species? I'm suggesting, Elena replied, that survival sometimes requires actions that can't be judged by those who weren't forced to make them. But I'm also here to assure this council that humanity has never used our capabilities except in defense of galactic civilization. Defense. The voice belonged to Counselor Rixin of the Oceanic Confederacy, a species known for their pacifist philosophies. You call the obliteration of the Tau Ceti system defense. Elena's jaw tightened. The Tau Ceti incident was classified at the highest levels, known only to the inner circle of each species' leadership. The fact that it was being discussed openly here meant that the decision to expel humanity had already been made behind closed doors. The Tau Ceti system, she said carefully, was evacuated 3 weeks before our operation. The Devourer hive ships that were preparing to launch toward Terra Prime. We had intelligence suggesting they were developing adaptive countermeasures to our conventional weapons. So you destroyed an entire star system, Counselor Rixin continued, his voice carrying the harmonic undertones that indicated deep distress in his species. 7 planets, countless archaeological sites, millions of years of natural evolution, gone in moments. To prevent the loss of trillions of lives, Elena shot back, her diplomatic composure finally cracking slightly. We made the calculation that saving inhabited worlds was worth the loss of empty ones. The Grand Speaker's arms moved in a complex pattern that the translation systems rendered as deep philosophical concern mixed with administrative necessity. It was a distinctly alien concept, but Elena understood its meaning. They were going through the motions of debate, but the outcome had been predetermined. The Council recognizes, Thecklon said, that humanity's actions during the Devourer War prevented a galactic catastrophe. However, the methods employed and the capabilities demonstrated raise serious questions about humanity's compatibility with peaceful coexistence. Dr. Chen leaned forward to whisper in Elena's ear. Ambassador, our intelligence networks are picking up unusual activity in the outer systems. Military buildups among several council species. This might not just be about expulsion. Elena's blood chilled. She had suspected for weeks that some council members viewed humanity not just as a diplomatic problem, but as a potential threat that needed to be neutralized. The thought that they might be planning military action while conducting this farce of a trial was both terrifying and grimly predictable. Grand Speaker, Elena said, her voice carrying a new edge, I would like to address the Council's concerns about humanity's future intentions. The floor recognizes Ambassador Vasquez. Elena stepped forward, closer to the center of the speaking circle. Around her, 347 alien species waited to hear what humanity would say in its defense. She could feel the weight of history pressing down on her, the knowledge that her next words might determine not just her species' place in the galaxy, but their survival. Humanity has spent the last 50 years trying to find our place among you, she began. We've adapted our technologies, modified our social structures, and constrained our expansion to meet your standards of civilized behavior. We've participated in joint research projects, cultural exchange programs, and peacekeeping operations. We've bled and died for species we'd never heard of when we first reached the stars. The hall was utterly silent now. Even the usually constant chatter of the hive mind representatives had ceased. But throughout all of this, Elena continued, We've been treated as the dangerous children of the galaxy. Too violent, too innovative, too willing to break things that others consider sacred. You've demanded that we change ourselves to fit your vision of what a civilized species should be. She turned slowly, making eye contact with delegates across the vast assembly. Today, you're telling us that we've failed that test. That despite our sacrifices, despite our contributions, despite the fact that we saved this galaxy from complete destruction, we're too dangerous to remain part of your community. Elena paused, letting the weight of her words settle over the assembly. Very well, but understand this. Humanity has never been conquered. We've never surrendered. We've never asked for anything from a galaxy except the chance to stand as equals among the stars. If you choose to cast us out, if you decide that our methods and our nature make us incompatible with your vision of galactic civilization, then we will accept that judgment. The silence stretched on for long moments. Finally, Grand Speaker Theclon gestured for order. The Council will now vote on the motion for humanity's expulsion from the Galactic Council. All those in favor. The voting holographs lit up across the assembly. Green lights for expulsion, red for maintaining membership, amber for abstention. Elena watched as the tallies accumulated, feeling strangely detached from the process. The outcome had been inevitable from the moment they decided to use quantum disruption weapons against the Devourers. The final count appeared in the air above the assembly. 312 votes for expulsion, 31 against, for abstentions. The motion carries, announced the Grand Speaker. By the authority vested in this council by the Galactic Accords, humanity is hereby expelled from the Galactic Council, effective immediately. All human diplomatic missions are to be withdrawn within 30 standard days. All joint operations are to be terminated. All access to Council resources, databases, and territories is revoked. Elena nodded slowly, feeling an unexpected sense of relief wash over her. The pretense was finally over. No more walking on eggshells, no more trying to make humanity fit into alien concepts of civilized behavior. We understand the Council's decision, she said formally. Humanity will comply with the expulsion order. We will withdraw our diplomatic missions, terminate our joint operations, and cease all requests for Council resources. She paused, studying the faces and forms of the beings who had just cast her species into galactic exile. But let me leave you with this thought. You've spent so much time afraid of what humanity might become that you've forgotten what we already are. We're the species that stood alone against the Devourers when everyone else was still debating. We are the ones who developed weapons capable of stopping them when your conventional forces had failed for decades. We are the species that sacrificed our own people and worlds to save yours. Elena's voice carried a note of finality that made many of the delegates shift uncomfortably. You're casting us out because you're afraid of our capabilities. But ask yourselves this. What happens the next time the galaxy faces a threat like the Devourers? What happens when you need someone willing to make the hard choices, to break the sacred rules, to do whatever it takes to survive? She turned toward the exit, her delegation following in perfect formation. You'll find out what silence from humanity really means. The great doors of the assembly hall closed behind the human delegation with a resonance that seemed to echo through the vast space long after they were gone. For several minutes, none of the remaining delegates spoke. Finally, Counselor Veltar of the Hegemony broke the silence. Perhaps, he said quietly, we should discuss enhanced security protocols for our border systems. But by then, the humans were already gone, and across the galaxy, something fundamental had shifted. In the Outer Rim territories, human ships were beginning to disappear from trade routes and diplomatic missions. Communication relays went dark one by one. The vast network of human intelligence assets, researchers, and cultural ambassadors that had woven itself throughout galactic civilization began to withdraw, pulling back toward the Sol system like a tide retreating before a storm. Within hours of the vote, the first reports began arriving. Human colonies were going silent. Human merchant vessels were failing to respond to hails. Human research stations were powering down their transmitters. It wasn't chaos or panic. It was coordinated, systematic, and thorough. Humanity was keeping its word. They were withdrawing from galactic civilization. But as the days passed and the scope of that withdrawal became clear, many council members began to realize that they had made a terrible miscalculation. Humanity hadn't just been participants in galactic civilization. They had been integral to its functioning in ways that no one had fully understood. The silence from human space grew deeper with each passing day, and, with it, a growing unease spread through the galaxy. They had cast out the species that had saved them from the Devourers, but in doing so, they had also eliminated the only force that had proven capable of standing against existential threats. And in the darkness between the stars, other things were beginning to stir. Ancient threats that the Devourers had kept at bay through their mere presence. Things that had waited for millennia for the galaxy's protectors to lower their guard. The Council had gotten what they wanted, a galaxy free from humanity's dangerous influence. But as the reports of strange signals from dead space began to filter in, as long-dormant threats began to wake from their slumber, one question began to haunt the corridors of power throughout the galaxy. What had they really done? Admiral Kexmoth of the Hegemony Third Fleet stood before the massive tactical display in his flagship's command center, watching as another human outpost went dark. This one had been a research station in the Proximus sector, staffed by 200 human scientists and their families. One moment it had been transmitting routine data about stellar mechanics. The next it was gone. Not destroyed, not abandoned, simply silent. That makes 47 installations in the past week, reported his intelligence officer, Commander Yilseth. Military bases, research stations, mining operations, even diplomatic residences. They're all following the same pattern. Complete communications blackout, no distress signals, no indication of evacuation procedures. They're just disappearing. Kexmoth's 6 eyes focused independently on different sections of the holographic map that showed the galaxy's communication networks. Where once there had been the steady pulse of human activity, the bright nodes of their colonies, the flowing lines of their trade routes, the complex web of their research networks. Now there was darkness, a growing void that seemed to expand daily as more human assets fell silent. "Sir," came another voice from the communications station. "We're receiving a priority transmission from Council Command. They want a status report on Operation Watchful Eye." The Admiral's throat sacs inflated with irritation. Operation Watchful Eye had been the Council's attempt to monitor human space during the withdrawal period, ostensibly to ensure compliance with the expulsion order, but really to gather intelligence on human capabilities and intentions. It had been a disaster from the start. "Tell them that we've lost contact with another 3 surveillance teams," Kexmoth said grimly. "That brings our total losses to 18 ships and over 400 personnel." The communications officer's scales paled to a sickly yellow. 18 ships, sir? The previous report only mentioned 12. The Zephyrian Light cruiser Windseeker stopped reporting 6 hours ago while investigating the Vega system. Same pattern as all the others, routine patrol, then complete communications blackout. No weapons fire detected, no distress calls, no debris field. It's as if they never existed. Commander Yilseth approached the tactical display, her biometric scanners running constantly over the human-controlled sectors. "Admiral, there's something else. Our deep space monitoring stations have detected massive energy signatures moving through human space. The readings don't match any known propulsion systems, but the scale is concerning." Define concerning. "Signatures consistent with fleets of several thousand vessels, sir. Moving at velocities that should be impossible for anything larger than a fighter craft. Whatever they've built since the expulsion, it's unlike anything in our databases." Kexmoth felt the familiar chill that had been haunting his dreams since humanity's withdrawal began. In his 3 centuries of military service, he had never encountered an enemy that simply vanished. Pirates could be tracked, rebels could be infiltrated, even the Devourers had fought in ways that could be understood and countered. But humanity's response to their expulsion was unlike anything in galactic military doctrine. "Sir, The tactical officer's voice carried an edge of panic. Long-range sensors are detecting movement in the Sol system. Massive formations emerging from behind Jupiter's radiation shadow. The tactical display shifted, zooming in on the human's homeworld system. What it showed made Kexmoth's blood run cold. Thousands of contacts, each one larger than a Council dreadnought, moving in perfect formation through the asteroid belt. But that wasn't the terrifying part. The terrifying part was that they had been completely invisible until they chose to reveal themselves. "How long have they been there?" he asked quietly. "Unknown, sir. Our sensors show them appearing simultaneously across a volume of space larger than most star systems. Either they just materialized out of nothing, or they have stealth capabilities beyond our ability to detect." On the display, the human fleet continued its methodical movement through the Sol system, their formations precise and purposeful. As Kexmoth watched, smaller groups began breaking off from a main force, heading toward the outer planets where human military installations were known to exist. "They're mobilizing," Commander Yulseth said unnecessarily. "The question is, mobilizing for what?" Before Kexmoth could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the command center. The holographic display flashed red as priority alerts flooded in from across the galaxy. "Admiral," the communications officer called out, "emergency transmission from the Oceanic Confederacy. They report complete loss of contact with their border worlds along the human frontier. No signs of attack, no distress calls, just silence." More alerts followed in rapid succession. The Philosophical Council of Zirion reported that their meditation colonies near human space had stopped responding to telepathic contact. The Delphinian Collective's bioluminescent communication network had gone dark across 3 entire sectors. The chromate crystal resonance frequencies that connected their species across interstellar distances were being disrupted by some unknown interference pattern. "It's not just the humans going silent," Yulseth realized, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's everything near human space. They're creating a dead zone around their territory." Kexmoth studied the expanding pattern of silence on the tactical display. It wasn't random. There was a deliberate methodology to it, a careful progression that suggested extensive planning and perfect execution. The humans weren't just withdrawing from galactic civilization. They were actively isolating themselves, cutting all ties with the galaxy that had cast them out. "Sir," the intelligence officer said, "we're receiving scattered reports from deep space monitoring stations. Ships approaching human space are being redirected." "Redirected how?" "Unknown, sir. The reports are fragmented, but it appears that vessels attempting to enter human-controlled space are being met by unknown forces and encouraged to leave. No weapons fire, no hostile action, just a suggestion that they should be somewhere else." The Admiral's throat sacs contracted with worry. In military terms, what the humans were doing was both brilliant and terrifying. They were creating a buffer zone around their territory without firing a shot, using methods that the galactic community couldn't understand or counter. More importantly, they were doing it with a level of coordination and capability that suggested they had been preparing for this moment for far longer than anyone had realized. "Commander Yulseth," he said finally, "prepare a full report for Council Command. Include everything. The fleet movements, the communication blackouts, the energy signatures, all of it. What should I tell them about our next course of action?" Kexmoth looked at the tactical display one more time, watching as the darkness around human space continued to expand. "Tell them that we are dealing with something unprecedented. The humans aren't just leaving galactic civilization. They're actively severing all connections with it. And based on what we've observed, they have capabilities that we never suspected." He paused, thinking about the implications of what they had witnessed. "Also tell them that if this was humanity's plan all along, then we may have seriously underestimated what we were dealing with." Across the galaxy, similar scenes were playing out in command centers, intelligence facilities, and government chambers. The Zephyrian High Command was frantically trying to re-establish contact with their forward reconnaissance units. The hive mind of Sector 7 was experiencing unprecedented gaps in their collective consciousness where human space had once provided data points. Even the ancient archives of Morvith, which had recorded galactic history for millions of years, were finding that their monitoring systems could no longer penetrate the growing void around human territory. Dr. Jinkala of the Philosophical Council of Zirion sat in her meditation chamber, trying to process the reports that flooded in from across the galaxy. As one of the primary architects of humanity's expulsion, she had expected resistance, perhaps even military retaliation. What she hadn't expected was this systematic withdrawal from all contact with galactic civilization. The humans are implementing what they call a clean break protocol, reported her assistant, a young Zirian whose crystalline form pulsed with anxiety. All diplomatic channels have been severed, all trade agreements have been terminated, all research collaborations have ended. They're not just leaving the Council. They're leaving the galactic community entirely. Dr. Jinkala's form shifted through several light spectra, indicating deep contemplation mixed with growing concern. Have there been any attempts at communication? Any explanation for their actions beyond the formal withdrawal notice? None, philosopher. The humans have gone completely silent. No responses to diplomatic overtures, no acknowledgement of communication attempts, no explanation of their intentions. It's as if they decided that the galaxy no longer exists for them. The implications of this were staggering. Humanity hadn't just been a military power or a political entity within the galactic community. Over the past 50 years, they had become integral to the functioning of galactic civilization in ways that were only now becoming apparent. Their research contributions, their technological innovations, their cultural exchanges, all of it was disappearing along with their formal presence in the Council. Philosopher, the assistant continued, there's something else. Our deep meditation networks have detected disturbances in the fundamental fabric of space around human territory. It's as if reality itself is being altered in ways that we cannot comprehend. Dr. Jinkala's form solidified into a pattern of deep concern. In Zirian philosophy, the fabric of space-time was considered sacred, the medium through which consciousness itself traveled. The idea that humanity might be manipulating it on a large scale was both fascinating and deeply troubling. What kind of disturbances? The meditation networks describe it as reality becoming opaque. Areas of space that were once transparent to consciousness are now impenetrable. Our most advanced philosophers cannot achieve awareness beyond the boundaries that humanity is establishing. Dr. Jinkala stood silently for long minutes, processing the implications. The Zirian Philosophical Council had been instrumental in humanity's expulsion, arguing that their destructive innovation posed a threat to galactic stability. Now it seemed that humanity's response to that expulsion was proving their point in ways that no one had anticipated. "Send a message to the Grand Speaker," she said finally. "Tell him that we may need to convene an emergency session of the Council. What we're observing suggests that humanity's capabilities extend far beyond what we documented during the expulsion proceedings." As reports continued to flood in from across the galaxy, a pattern began to emerge. Humanity wasn't simply withdrawing. They were demonstrating capabilities that defied everything the galactic community thought they knew about physics, technology, and military doctrine. The question that haunted every government and military command was the same. If humanity had these capabilities all along, why hadn't they used them during the Devourer War? The answer, when it came, would terrify the galaxy even more than humanity's silence. In the depths of space, far from any inhabited system, a small probe drifted silently through the void. It was one of thousands that the Council had deployed over the years to monitor deep space for signs of returning Devourer activity. Its sensors were capable of detecting energy signatures across vast distances, analyzing quantum fluctuations, and identifying threats that might emerge from the spaces between stars. What detected 3 days after humanity's withdrawal began should have been impossible. The Devourer's signatures were returning. Not just 1 or 2 scouts, but massive formations moving through deep space with purpose and coordination. The quantum signatures matched the historical records perfectly, but there was something different about them. They moved with a confidence that suggested they knew something fundamental had changed in the galaxy's defensive posture. The probe's final transmission before it was destroyed contained a single, terrifying observation. The Devourer formations were heading directly for the sectors that had been evacuated during humanity's withdrawal. They were moving toward the silence that humanity had created as if they were drawn to it, or as if they had been waiting for it. Across the galaxy, the realization began to dawn that humanity's expulsion might have been the trigger for something far worse than anyone had imagined. The species that had stood alone against the Devourers, that had developed weapons capable of stopping them, that had sacrificed everything to protect galactic civilization, was gone. And, in the darkness between the stars, ancient hungers were beginning to stir once again. The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened in chaos. Representatives from across the galaxy materialized in the Grand Assembly Hall through every available communication method: holographic projection, quantum entanglement, telepathic link, and, in some desperate cases, crude electromagnetic transmission. The usual protocols and ceremonies were abandoned in favor of urgent, panicked discussion. Grand Speaker Thicklon's forearms gestured frantically as he tried to maintain order over the cacophony of languages, frequencies, and mental emanations that filled the hall. The emergency session will come to order. We must address the crisis systematically. Systematically? The interruption came from Admiral Corveth of the Delphinian Defense Force, her bioluminescent patches flashing angry red sequences. 57 of my worlds have gone dark in the past 6 days. Not destroyed, not invaded, just empty. The populations are gone, Admiral. 17 billion people vanished without a trace. The hall erupted in similar reports. Counselor Veltar's serpentine form coiled with agitation as he reported the disappearance of entire hegemony colonies along what had been the human border. The hive mind representatives buzzed with frantic collective consciousness as they described gaps in their awareness where entire star systems had once provided data points. The pattern is consistent across all affected territories, announced Dr. Mordeth, the Chromot crystalline intelligence specialist who had been analyzing the crisis data. Populations vanish first, then all electronic systems shut down, then quantum communication networks go dark. It's happening in a wave pattern moving outward from the boundaries of human space. Moving toward the galactic core, added Counselor Vititra, her mandibles clicking with barely controlled panic. At current rates of expansion, it will reach the inner worlds within 30 standard days. Grand Speaker Thecklon's throat sacs deflated with exhaustion. In the 3 days since the emergency had begun, he had slept less than 6 hours total. Do we have any intelligence on what's causing these disappearances? Any evidence of hostile action? None, replied Dr. Mordeth. No weapons signatures, no signs of struggle, no debris fields. The affected areas are pristine, as if the populations simply decided to leave and took everything with them. Everything, asked Counselor Yilneth of the Oceanic Confederacy. Everything. Personal belongings, vehicles, industrial equipment, even pets and livestock. But they leave behind no trace of where they went or how they accomplished such complete evacuations. Our best intelligence suggests that millions of beings are being moved simultaneously across hundreds of light years with no detectable transportation method. The silence that followed was filled with the kind of dread that only comes from facing the unknown. For millennia, the galactic community had dealt with pirates, rebels, natural disasters, and even existential threats like the Devourers. But those had all been comprehensible in some way. This was different. This defied everything they thought they knew about the limits of technology and physics. There is something else, Dr. Mordeth continued, his crystalline form refracting light in patterns that indicated extreme distress. Our deep space monitoring networks have detected massive devourer formations moving through the affected areas. They appear to be investigating the empty worlds. The panic in the hall was immediate and overwhelming. Several representatives began speaking simultaneously, their various forms of communication creating a discord that threatened to overload the translation systems. How many formations? Grand Speaker Theclon asked when he finally managed to restore some semblance of order. Conservative estimates suggest at least 300 major hive ships, supported by thousands of smaller vessels. They're moving in perfect coordination, systematically examining every world that has been evacuated. But here's the truly disturbing part. They're not attacking anything. They appear to be searching for something. Counselor Veltar uncoiled from his speaking platform, his species equivalent of standing at attention. Searching for what? We don't know. But intelligence analysis suggests they're looking for signs of human activity. Every world they investigate had some form of human presence before the evacuations began. The implications of this sent a new wave of terror through the assembly. The Devourers, the ancient enemy that had nearly consumed the galaxy before humanity's intervention, were active again. But instead of their usual pattern of immediate consumption and assimilation, they were conducting what appear to be reconnaissance operations. Counselors, came a new voice from the rear of the assembly. Dr. Jinkala of the Zirian Philosophical Council materialized through quantum projection, her crystalline form flickering with the energy required for long-distance communication. I bring disturbing intelligence from the deep archives. All attention focused on the Zirian philosopher. The deep archives were the galaxy's most comprehensive historical database, containing records stretching back millions of years. If anyone could provide context for the current crisis, it would be them. Our analysis of ancient devourer behavior patterns has revealed something that we missed during the original war, Dr. Jinkala continued. The devourers didn't just consume civilizations, they were hunting something specific. Every major devourer incursion in galactic history followed the same pattern. They would search extensively before beginning their consumption protocols. Searching for what? Asked Grand Speaker Theclon. We believe they were hunting for species with certain quantum signatures, specifically species capable of manipulating space-time at the macro level. The historical record suggests that whenever such species emerged, devourer activity increased dramatically. The pieces of a terrible puzzle began falling into place in the minds of the assembled representatives. Dr. Mordeath was the first to verbalize the conclusion. You're suggesting that the Devourers were originally attracted to our galaxy because of humanity's capabilities. More than that, Dr. Jinkala replied. I'm suggesting that humanity's quantum disruption weapons, their ability to manipulate reality at the fundamental level, may have been acting as a beacon for Devourer forces throughout the known universe. When humanity withdrew and ceased using their technology, the Devourers lost their primary tracking signal. So now, they're searching manually, Admiral Korveth said grimly, looking for any trace of the quantum signatures that originally drew them here. The hall fell silent as the full scope of the crisis became clear. By expelling humanity from the Council, they hadn't just lost their most effective defenders against the Devourers. They had forced humanity to withdraw the very technology that had been keeping the Devourers focused on specific locations instead of spreading across the galaxy. There's more, Dr. Jinkala continued. Our philosophical networks have detected something unprecedented in the areas affected by the population disappearances. Space-time itself appears to be stabilizing. The quantum fluctuations that normally characterize inhabited space are smoothing out, creating regions of perfect dimensional stability. What does that mean? Asked Counselor Zythera. We're not certain, but our best theoretical models suggest that someone is preparing those regions of space for something that requires absolute quantum stability. Something that would be disrupted by the normal electromagnetic and gravitational signatures of inhabited worlds. The implications were staggering. Not only were the Devourers returning, but someone, presumably humanity, was systematically evacuating entire sectors of the galaxy and preparing them for some unknown purpose. The scale of the operation suggested capabilities beyond anything the galactic community had imagined. Counselors, Grand Speaker Theclon said finally, I believe we must consider the possibility that humanity's expulsion was not the end of their involvement in galactic affairs, but the beginning of something else entirely. You think they planned this? Admiral Korveth asked. I think, Theclon replied carefully, that humanity may have been preparing for contingencies that we never considered. Their withdrawal was too coordinated, too comprehensive, and too precisely timed to be a simple diplomatic response. This has the hallmarks of a long-term strategic operation. Dr. Mordeth's crystalline form shifted to patterns indicating deep analysis. If that's true, then the question becomes, what are they preparing for? The answer came not from the assembly hall, but from the deep space monitoring stations at the galaxy's edge. Emergency signals began flooding into the Council's communication networks, each one carrying the same terrifying message. Massive formations of unknown vessels were emerging from the void beyond the galactic rim. The ships were unlike anything in the galactic databases. They moved with purpose and coordination that suggested advanced intelligence, but their energy signatures were completely foreign. Most disturbing of all, they appear to be heading directly for the areas that humanity had evacuated. New contact signatures, announced the Council's senior intelligence coordinator. His voice barely controlled panic. Estimated fleet strength, over 10,000 major vessels, supported by hundreds of thousands of smaller craft. Configuration unknown, technology unknown, intentions unknown. Are they Devourer vessels? Asked Grand Speaker Theclon. Negative, sir. The energy signatures are completely different. These appear to be something else entirely. Dr. Giancala's philosophical networks were working frantically to process the implications. Grand Speaker, I recommend immediate implementation of Council Defense Protocol 7. Whatever is happening, it appears that multiple unknown forces are converging on our galaxy simultaneously. And in the middle of it all, Admiral Corveth added grimly, humanity has gone completely silent. We have no idea what their intentions are, what their capabilities really are, or whether they're ally or enemy in what's coming. The Grand Speaker's four arms moved in the ritualistic patterns of his species, but for the first time in his long career, the gestures felt inadequate to the moment. All Council members are hereby authorized to implement emergency defensive measures. All available fleets are to be recalled to protect core worlds. And he paused, the weight of what he was about to say visible in his posture. And we need to consider the possibility that we may have made the gravest mistake in galactic history by casting out the one species that might have been capable of protecting us from what's coming. In the silence that followed, reports continued to flood in from across the galaxy. More worlds going dark, more Devourer formations moving through evacuated space, more unknown vessels emerging from the void. And through it all, humanity's territory remained utterly, completely silent. The galaxy that had cast them out was beginning to understand that humanity's silence wasn't the absence of action. It was the calm before a storm of unimaginable proportions. And in the deep archives of human space, in facilities that no galactic intelligence service had ever detected, ancient contingency plans were being implemented. Plans that had been developed not for victory, but for survival. Plans that took into account not just the Devourers, but threats that the galactic community had never imagined. The galaxy had wanted humanity gone. They were about to discover what that actually meant. The first indication that humanity's silence was about to end came from the most unlikely source, a children's toy. Dr. Sarah Chun, the former lead researcher on Project Pandora, sat in her study aboard the generation ship New Geneva, watching her daughter play with a simple holographic puzzle. The toy projected three-dimensional geometric shapes that the child could manipulate with her thoughts, a common educational tool throughout human space. But something was different about this particular toy. The patterns it was generating were impossibly complex, fractally recursive structures that seemed to exist in more than 3 dimensions. Arya, Sarah called to the ship's artificial intelligence. Are you monitoring Lily's puzzle patterns? Yes, Dr. Chun. The child appears to be unconsciously generating mathematical sequences that correspond to 11-dimensional space-time manipulation. The complexity is increasing exponentially with each play session. Sarah set down her coffee and moved closer to her daughter. This wasn't the first strange occurrence since the evacuation had begun. Across human space, Children were demonstrating capabilities that had previously required massive industrial facilities to achieve. Adults were reporting enhanced cognitive abilities, improved pattern recognition, and, most disturbingly, an intuitive understanding of quantum mechanics that seemed to emerge from nowhere. Arya, what's our current status on the Prometheus protocol? Phase 7 is now complete, Dr. Chun. All evacuated populations have been successfully integrated into the network. Quantum baseline stability has been achieved across 47,000 star systems. We are ready for Phase 8 implementation. The Prometheus protocol. Even Sarah, who had been one of its primary architects, sometimes struggled to fully comprehend its scope. It had begun as a theoretical framework during the darkest days of the Devourer War, a contingency plan for what to do if humanity ever found itself truly alone in the galaxy. What it had become was something that redefined the very concept of human civilization. Dr. Chun, Arya continued, we are receiving priority communications from Admiral Martinez aboard the Magellan. The Council fleet movements have accelerated. They appear to be massing for some kind of large-scale operation. Sarah nodded grimly. They have been monitoring the galaxy's increasing panic through their deep space surveillance networks. The Devourer formations, the unknown vessels from beyond the galactic rim, the systematic evacuation of entire sectors. To outside observers, it must have looked like the beginning of some cosmic catastrophe. The irony was that the galactic community's fear of humanity had made it impossible to explain what was really happening. Put Admiral Martinez through. The holographic projector in Sarah's study activated, displaying the weathered face of Elena Martinez, formerly Ambassador Elena Vasquez of the Galactic Council. The woman who had once stood before 300 alien species, defending humanity's right to exist, now commanded the largest military force in human history. Sarah, Elena said without preamble, we've reached the point of no return. Council intelligence has detected our deep space construction projects. They're interpreting them as preparation for some kind of invasion. How long before they make their move? Intelligence estimates 72 hours. They're assembling a coalition fleet unlike anything seen since the Devourer War. 300 species, over 50,000 vessels. They're calling it Operation Final Peace. Sarah felt a familiar chill. The galaxy's response to humanity's silence was exactly what the protocol's planners had predicted. Fear would drive them to preemptive action, and preemptive action would force humanity to reveal capabilities that would terrify them even more. Are we ready for Phase 8? Elena's expression was grim. The infrastructure is in place. The population integration is complete. But, Sarah, once we initiate Phase 8, there's no going back. We'll be committed to a course that changes not just humanity, but the fundamental nature of reality in this galaxy. Through the study's viewport, Sarah could see the massive construction that surrounded the New Geneva. Structures that defied conventional physics, built from materials that existed in a state of quantum superposition, powered by engines that drew energy directly from the vacuum of space itself. And this was just one of thousands of similar installations throughout human space. The Council made their choice when they cast us out, Sarah said finally. They decided that humanity was too dangerous to coexist with their vision of galactic civilization. We accepted that judgment, but that doesn't mean we're going to let them destroy what we built. Arya, Elena's voice came through the communication link. Initiate Phase 8 of the Prometheus protocol. Authorization Martinez 77 Alpha. Phase 8 authorization acknowledged. Arya responded. Beginning quantum network activation across all human space. Estimated time to full implementation. 6 hours, 37 minutes. What happened next would have been invisible to outside observers, but across human space, reality itself began to change. The quantum stabilization fields that had been quietly established around evacuated worlds suddenly activated, creating zones of space-time where the normal laws of physics operated under human-defined parameters. Matter and energy began flowing along previously impossible pathways. Communication networks that had been silent for weeks suddenly blazed alive, but with capabilities that exceeded anything in the galactic databases. In her daughter's hands, the holographic puzzle began generating patterns that described the mathematical relationship between consciousness and quantum mechanics. Patterns that would have taken the galaxy's greatest minds centuries to develop were being casually created by a 7-year-old child whose cognitive abilities had been enhanced by exposure to humanity's quantum infrastructure. Sarah, Elena said quietly, "There's something else. Our deep space monitoring networks have identified what those unknown vessels from beyond the galactic rim actually are. And they're evacuation ships. The Devourers aren't the apex predators in this region of the universe. They're refugees fleeing from something even worse. And that something has finally caught up with them." The implications hit Sarah like a physical blow. The Devourers, the ancient enemy that had nearly consumed the galaxy, were themselves running from a greater threat. The quantum signatures that had attracted them to this galaxy hadn't just been beacons for conquest. They had been signals that this region of space contained the kind of advanced civilizations that might be capable of providing sanctuary. The harvesters, Sarah breathed. Elena nodded. That's what our xenoarchaeology teams are calling them. Based on the ancient records we've been able to decode, they're a nomadic intelligence that consumes entire galactic clusters. They don't just destroy civilizations. They harvest the quantum information that makes up consciousness itself. The Devourers were trying to reach us before the Harvesters could harvest this galaxy. And now the Harvesters are here, which explains why the Prometheus Protocol was designed the way it was. Our predecessors didn't just plan for defense against the Devourers. They planned for defense against something that could treat the Devourers as prey. Through the quantum network that now connected every human installation across the galaxy, Sarah could feel the collective consciousness of her species beginning to stir. Not a hive mind like some alien species, but something more complex, a networked intelligence that preserved individual identity while creating emergent capabilities that exceeded the sum of their parts. The evacuation programs, Sarah realized, we weren't just moving populations to safety. We were preparing them for integration into the network. 17 billion human minds, Sarah, enhanced by quantum processing capabilities, networked through space-time itself, and backed by industrial capabilities that can manipulate matter and energy at the fundamental level. We've become something that exists partially outside conventional space-time. And the other species? Elena's expression softened slightly. The evacuation protocols included non-human populations from the affected areas. They're safe, but they're also now part of the network whether they realize it or not. When the quantum integration is complete, they'll have access to cognitive abilities that their species never evolved. The question is whether they'll be able to handle it. And if they can't, then we'll have to make some very difficult decisions about the nature of consciousness and free will. The moral implications of what humanity had done and was continuing to do were staggering. By evacuating populations without their full consent and integrating them into a quantum consciousness network, humanity had essentially kidnapped 17 billion beings and fundamentally altered their neural structure. It was the kind of action that would have horrified the Galactic Council even more than humanity's military capabilities. But as reports began filtering in about the Harvester fleet's capabilities, Sarah began to understand why such extreme measures had been deemed necessary. The unknown vessels from beyond the galactic rim weren't just ships. They were mobile processing facilities capable of deconstructing entire star systems and converting the raw matter and energy into computational substrate for harvesting conscious beings. "Arya," Sarah said, "show me the Harvester fleet analysis." The holographic display in her study shifted to show the galaxy from a strategic perspective. The Harvester fleet was massive beyond comprehension. Millions of vessels ranging in size from small planets to artificial structures larger than star systems. They moved in perfect coordination, systematically processing everything in their path. Stars, planets, space stations, even the quantum vacuum itself. All of it was being converted into components for their harvesting operation. Current Harvester fleet trajectory indicates they will reach the galactic core in approximately 18 months, Arya reported. However, their advanced scouts have already begun probing the Outer Rim systems. First contact with Council forces is estimated to occur within 96 hours. And our defensive capabilities? Phase 8 implementation has provided humanity with access to 11-dimensional space-time manipulation. We can now operate partially outside conventional physics, making our installations effectively invisible to three-dimensional intelligence. Our industrial capacity has increased by several orders of magnitude. Most importantly, the quantum consciousness network allows for coordination and decision-making at near-light speed across interstellar distances. Elena leaned forward in the communication display. Sarah, we need to make a decision. Do we reveal ourselves to the Council? Do we warn them about what's coming? Or do we let them discover the truth when the harvesters arrive? It was the question that had haunted humanity's leadership since the expulsion. They had the power to protect the galaxy, but doing so would require revealing capabilities that would terrify every other species. The quantum consciousness network, the matter manipulation technology, the ability to exist partially outside normal space-time. All of it was so far beyond current galactic understanding that it would be interpreted as either divinity or demonic invasion. The Council is assembling a coalition fleet to attack us, Sarah pointed out. 50,000 ships, 300 species, all convinced that we're the greatest threat to galactic civilization. If we reveal ourselves now, they'll interpret it as proof that their fears were justified. And if we don't reveal ourselves, they'll be completely unprepared when the harvesters arrive. Through her daughter's toy, Sarah could see the quantum patterns that now suffused human space. Mathematical structures that described reality at levels of complexity that most species couldn't even conceptualize. The children who played with such toys would grow up thinking that 11-dimensional physics and quantum consciousness manipulation were as natural as walking or breathing. There's a third option, Sarah said finally. Elena raised an eyebrow. Which is, we let the Council make their attack. We demonstrate our defensive capabilities without revealing their full extent. And then we make them an offer they can't refuse. You want to use the coalition attack as a demonstration? Think about it, Elena. They're coming to destroy us because they're afraid of what we might be capable of. We show them exactly what we're capable of, but in the context of defending ourselves against their aggression. Then, when the harvesters arrive and the Council realizes they're facing something infinitely worse than humanity, we offer them the same protection we've given to our own people. Elena was quiet for long moments, processing the implications. Integration into the quantum consciousness network. It's the only way to survive what's coming. The harvesters don't just consume matter and energy, they harvest consciousness itself. The only way to protect against that is to exist partially outside the dimensions they can access. And the ethical implications of forcing that choice on the galaxy? Sarah looked at her daughter, still playing with patterns that described the fundamental structure of reality. The alternative is watching 300 species become food for entities that treat galaxies as harvesting grounds. Sometimes survival requires accepting changes that you're not ready for. Through the quantum network, she could feel the collective agreement of 17 billion human minds. They had already made their choice when the Council cast them out. Now, the galaxy would have to make its choice when faced with the alternative. In 72 hours, the coalition fleet would arrive in human space, expecting to find a dangerous but comprehensible enemy. Instead, they would discover that humanity had become something that existed beyond their ability to understand or attack. And shortly after that, when the harvesters arrived in force, they would learn what true cosmic horror looked like. The galaxy had cast out humanity because they were afraid of what humans might become. They were about to discover that their fears had been completely inadequate to the reality. And in the silence of human space, 17 billion networked minds prepared to offer the galaxy a choice: evolution or extinction. The age of individual species was ending. The age of networked consciousness was about to begin, whether the galaxy liked it or not.